So, no doubt you're wondering what we've been doing since we last met in November and where we've got to with our work on the circuit vision. After the last circuit meeting, you sent us away with the 5 circuit priorities and a whole batch of questions, 27 in all. At our first meeting in December, we considered the 5 priorities and all those 27 questions and slowly managed to group them together into 5 areas for consideration. Worship, transforming ourselves through discipleship, missioning, pioneering, and local social action. In order to give us something concrete to aim at, we then thought about what we'd like to be able to report to the District Synod, or to anyone else come to that, when asked the question, what's happening in the Darlington Methodist circuit? This led us to 5 outcomes we'd like to see. Firstly, varied Christian worship for everyone from 0 to 100, where all feel welcome and young and old are well integrated, possibly with a central worship point offering multiple styles of worship. Secondly, we'd like to see outreach programmes and social action around the circuit, working with local charities and other Christian denominations rather than going it alone, to offer community support to local needs, with some emphasis on the elderly. Thirdly, we'd like to see training for office holders and discipling and nurturing of everyone, so that confidence is built and people feel enabled to carry out their roles. Fourthly, we'd like to see our youth work grown and young people well integrated into the life of the whole church. And fifthly, we'd like to see families nurtured as well as children, since parents will bring their children, whilst not all children will bring their parents to church. At this point we thought we'd made good progress, but we needed more time to think and pray, so we agreed to meet again early in 2013. At this second meeting, we worked in 3 groups, each group having representatives from each section of the circuit to put some flesh on the bones. By the end of the second meeting, we had 3 different strands of thought relating to the 5 points of the first meeting. It was all getting rather complicated, but we felt we had made progress and set a date for our third meeting a fortnight later, committing ourselves to further prayer as we reflected on the ideas so far. Our third meeting was the most exciting. We came together and it seemed as if none of us was clear about the way forward. However, we had a wide-ranging discussion in which we acknowledged the difficulties and hurt that the previous circuit review had caused. We recognised too that this previous review had actually prepared the ground for the current visioning process, and that all of us are now in a different place. We were also clear that what we would propose would not be about closing church buildings. That is not what we're here for. By the end of this third meeting, it was evident to all of us that God's Spirit had been vigorously at work, and we had all caught an exciting vision of the future for Methodism in Darlington. We have to ascribe this to the Spirit of God, for we actually reached a consensus about the way forward, and we were and are enthusiastic about this vision. We fervently believe that this will enable us to go on building the kingdom here in Darlington. So let's begin where we began, with how we understand the church. What does it mean to be church? We've inherited from the past 200 years a model of church that, for the sake of argument, we'll call the gathered model. We've accumulated buildings which we own, and their primary function is to give us space to gather for worship. Perhaps we let other groups use our buildings from time to time, or use them for other church-related activities. But by and large we see them as spaces where we can gather to worship the God who's called us. Generally, we like to have nice buildings. And at times we've wanted to have buildings that are better than the ones down the road. And so we've built more and bigger places to gather in. And that's great, and it's worked well in the past. But something tells us that this model seems to be running out of steam. It works by gathering like-minded people together. But that pool of like-minded people has drastically shrunk in recent years. Come to church, we might say, but not many people are responding. They can think of better, more comfortable places to go than the buildings we've upkept for the purpose of worshipping God. So it's not so much that this model is bad, just that it's had its heyday, and it doesn't do what it says on the tin anymore. the gathered model of church uses resources intensively. Think about the presbyters you need to keep multiple gathered churches going. It relies upon committees and office holders, treasurers, stewards, property stewards, church council members. Even this pool of people is running out. How often do we struggle to fill a post in church? And what if in the future we might need to have only 4 staff instead of the current 6 in order to balance the books? The gathered model collapses. It is collapsing, and we are picking up the pieces. But perhaps it doesn't have to be this way. Imagine a church that is not burdened by the buildings it owns, because they're financially self-sustaining. Imagine a church which concentrates its financial resources on people, not places, because the places it does have are taking care of themselves. Imagine a church which is ready at a moment's notice to down tools and follow where the Spirit's leading. Imagine a pop-up church that is where it needs to be at that particular moment, for the sake of the community, to see God's kingdom come on earth as in heaven. Imagine a church which takes seriously the words of Jesus to the woman at the well. A day is coming when you won't worship God in this special place or in that special place, because you'll worship God everywhere. Imagine a church vibrant in worship, throbbing with God's Spirit, engaged in world-transforming discipleship. Wouldn't you like to be a part of a church like that? We would, and we believe we can get there. This isn't pie in the sky, it's pie on our plates, ready to be taken and enjoyed. Let's just stress again that we didn't know that we'd end up with this particular pie on our plates. As we were together in that meeting, it just sort of happened. The ideas came all at once, and they seemed to fit, like a jigsaw we just happened to stumble across. We believe that God's Spirit set us free to imagine a future just like the one we've described. Wouldn't it be amazing if you were to be stirred to imagine that same future? Here goes. The time has come, we believe, to move away from the gathered model of church. On the gathered model, it's tempting to think that we're identified by our buildings. The buildings are our space. They belong to us. These 4 walls are our 4 walls. But imagine the Methodist Church in Darlington as a church without walls. How often have we boxed God's Spirit into the walls of our buildings as if God could only ever do transformative work in here and not out there? Imagine that we make a policy decision here at Circuit Meeting that we're no longer going to pour our resources into our walls. We're no longer going to maintain spaces whose sole purpose or primary purpose is for the hour or 2 of worship we hold every week. Imagine that we put all our buildings to work so that they become self-sustaining, financially viable, without needing the offering of our hard-earned weekly donations. Maybe a building could be a community cafe, or a thrift shop, or a quality venue for conferences and entertainment. Whatever our building might be used for, we've given up the idea that the walls are our walls, to be supported by our giving, our cash. The walls, the buildings, belong to our communities. They are given up to the world in the service of God's kingdom, because we know that God's church, the only church that matters, has no walls. So, if we're no longer maintaining our buildings, then what are we giving for? We're giving for ministry and mission. And to do this well in a church without walls, we need to gather as many people together as possible to celebrate God and explore God's purposes for our lives. The Apostle Paul said, "We're all one in Christ Jesus." So imagine only one Methodist church in Darlington, with everyone's membership not based in your local building, but in the circuit as a whole. Imagine meeting twice a month as Methodists in Darlington in one place, celebrating God with vibrant worship of all kinds, learning about God in ways that make sense to each of us, being resourced and equipped by all the circuit staff. That's what pouring our circuit resources into worship would look like, producing something of dependable quality that stirs our souls and moves us to action from fortnight to fortnight. We'd need to use a space that had plenty of rooms for all the activities we'd like to include. Children's work, music that's worth inviting people to hear, youth work, teaching. But remember, this space wouldn't be always set up for worship. It wouldn't be our walls. We're a church without walls. We'd meet in a place that's user-friendly, that meets all our many needs, that is accessible and comfortable and fit for purpose. So, you might be asking, what happens in the buildings formerly known as churches? And what happens when it's not the 2 times that we gather each month for our vibrant equipping worship? Well, with the resources freed up by centralising worship 2 times a month and gathering the staff together to work with this one large circuit church, we'd be able to go to work nurturing kingdom activities in our local communities. It might be that in the cafe that runs in your building, you'd like an Alpha Cross or a messy church. Or maybe in your thrift shop you'd like a study group or lunchtime worship. Or maybe you could use your excellent conference facilities to hold a prayer event. We think that by getting rid of the burden of maintaining our buildings as dedicated spaces for worship, and by seeing our identity as Methodists together in Darlington, we'd be able to do more, not less, to serve our communities with the love and grace of Jesus. And surely that's what we're all about, isn't it? And you know why this is so great? Because it's already happening. Some of our local congregations are already putting it into practice. There's a messy church meeting in a school, because that's where appropriate facilities are. There are congregations already creating alternate worship spaces in church halls and community centres. We want to bless this kind of work and see it grow, and liberate all of us to join in. The thing about church without walls is this: by renegotiating our relationship with our building and sharing together as a vibrant worshipping circuit, instead of subsidising our buildings from money given for mission, we are free to plough the money generated by our buildings into joyful kingdom work. What might the future look like if we pursue this proposal? Well, firstly, we'd expect to see a vibrant Methodist community worshipping in the heart of Darlington. This would be supported and equipped by a staff team, working together rather than separately for the good of all. This Methodist community would be known for the quality and variety of its worship. This Methodist community would be known for its commitment to discipling and learning more about how to live as Christians in Darlington. This Methodist community would be known for its social outreach, providing for the needs of local communities. This Methodist community, us, we would be known for living out our covenant promise by sacrificially giving ourselves to the building of God's kingdom in Darlington. We believe that in this vision, we will be freed from the burden of our buildings and able to get on with the work of the kingdom. We're not talking about changing from our current gathered model to a better model of church, but rather to a model of church that is more appropriate to the current age. model that recognises that the gathered model is not where we need to be now. This church without walls is provisional, just as a tent is provisional, and we will always be adapting to new circumstances. In this model, our buildings will have a sustainable future and will provide us with space to do kingdom-building activities without giving us a great financial burden. Indeed, if all our buildings paid for themselves, we would have more resources for the work of the kingdom, as people and money are freed from the burden of property maintenance. We hope you have caught this vision of the kingdom for Darlington, and we would ask you now to consider what you have heard, pray hard about what you've heard, and be ready for our next circuit meeting in a fortnight's time on the 21st of February to make a decision about moving this exciting vision forward.